Crochet 101 with Athena, all about yarn. Welcome to Crochet 101 with me, Athena. Today we're doing a deep dive on all things yarn, and get ready because there's a lot to learn. Yarn weight. We're going to be covering the 4 main types of yarn, as well as what we can use them for. There are currently 8 sizes of yarn available, and those sizes are called weights. And the weight of the yarn is essentially how big it is. The first in the category of weighted yarn is 0, and that is known as lace, fingering yarn, or crochet thread. This yarn is super fine, and it looks like this. Super tiny, and it can be worked with a size B or 1.5 to 2.5 millimeter hook. And here's what it looks like when it's worked up a little bit. 0 weight yarn is good for a lot of really small, delicate projects. It can be good for lace, trim, and even good for some baby projects. The next category of yarn is 1, or also known as super fine yarn. And here's an example of it. Looks like when it's stretched out. This type of yarn works best with 2.5 to 3.5 millimeter or a size B to an E size hook. So this is what 2 rows of this super fine 1 yarn looks like. So 1 yarn works great on baby projects, things like socks, and things that need a very small crochet or knit. The next weight is 2, and this is known as fine or baby yarn. Both yarns 1 and 2 are known as baby yarn. This weight, 2, also is known as sport yarn, and this is what it looks like. And here's what this yarn looks like when it is worked up. Weight 2 yarn is great for a lot of things, including clothes. This is where we start getting into the more common yarn territory. A lot of common projects are shawls, once again, baby projects, and socks. The next yarn is 3, which is known as light yarn, DK, or worsted yarn. And this yarn can be used between a 4.5 to 5.5 millimeter hook, also known as an eye hook. And that can be used for just about any project. People make little plushies, also known as amigurumi. They make clothing, they make pillows. You can make pretty much everything because this is also one of the most common weights of yarn that is sold and used. Here's an example of that yarn. Here's what this looks like worked up. It's a little bit bigger than the others, and it's only gonna get bigger from here. Next up, we have 4, which is medium weight yarn, and that's also known as Aran or worsted yarn. And here is what it looks like. It's a tiny bit thicker than the last one. This yarn uses a 5.5 to 6.5 millimeter hook, which is I through K. Anything you can make with the yarn that is weight 3, you can make with yarn 4. It's just a tiny bit bigger, and it's also very easy to find. And here is the 4 weight yarn worked up. The next weight of yarn, 5, is called bulky yarn. It's also known as chunky, craft, or rug yarn. You can use this yarn with a 6.5 to 9 millimeter or K through M hook. This yarn is really thick, and you can start adding some serious bulk to your projects. You can still make things like sweaters, hats, and normal clothes, but they're going to work up very fast and they're going to be super chunky. This is also the weight of yarn that you can even start making things like those big, thick woven baskets that you see. And here is what that yarn looks like. Here's what it looks like worked up. The next weight of yarn, 6, is called super bulky and sometimes can also be known as roving yarn. This yarn can use a 9.5 to a 15 millimeter hook, which is an M through Q hook. This is where it starts getting really chunky. This is almost like a shoelace. And here's what this one looks like worked up. The last weight of yarn, which is 7, is called jumbo. And as you can see, it really is. And this yarn can use a Q hook onwards or a 15 millimeter hook onwards. And it's just so plushy and soft. Not all of it's plushy and soft, but this is a super thick yarn, and anything you make is gonna take like a quarter of the time it would take for any other size yarn. But it kind of looks weird. Like if you're gonna make something like socks, it's not gonna look very good. So you have to pick bigger projects for stuff like this. And here's what it looks like after only 2 rows. Fiber type. So now that we know all the sizes of yarn, let's talk about the 4 main types of yarn by their fiber content. There is animal yarn, there is plant yarn, there's synthetic yarn, and then there's the ever mysterious blend yarn. When it comes to animal yarns, if an animal has fur, you can probably make a yarn out of it. Even this could technically be made into yarn, but it would be a little bit more like, you know, a macrame rope or something. It wouldn't feel very good. Maybe don't try that. But when it comes to animal yarn, you can have things like Angora, you can have wool, you can have different types of wool, such as merino wool, which is extra soft. And some people even make yarn out of their cat's brushed hair, which would take a while. Animal yarns offer some wonderful advantages, especially if you can get them local and sustainably. Animal yarns are heat-proof. Just like any other natural fiber, animal yarns will not melt when you bring them up to the heat, unlike synthetic yarns, which means you can make things like pot holders, you can make outfits that you're planning on going near really hot things, like if you're going to a bonfire. You can choose an animal or a plant, a natural fiber, and you don't have to worry. Another benefit is animal fibers are very comfy and very warm. Sometimes you can get an itchy wool sweater, but if you get the right type of wool, it's going to feel very nice. One downside about animal fibers, especially wool, this is pretty much wool, is that it will felt. If you put it in the wash or if you just rub it too much, it has the risk of felting, which you may want depending on your preferences. But if you want to be able to clearly see each little knot, you might not want that. Another positive to animal-based yarns is that the colors are usually hand-dyed and the wool is usually hand-spun, especially if you get it locally. Animal fibers are also super warm, and things like wool, I have heard, have bits of antibacterial properties. I'm not sure how true that is, but it is something to look into for sure. Next, we have my favorite category, our wonderful plant fibers. This includes cotton yarn, linen yarn, and other types of natural materials such as bamboo. These yarns are usually made very sustainably, and they're a lot better for the earth than synthetic yarns. But just like animal yarns, they are a little bit pricier than synthetic yarns, and just like animal yarns again, they are a little bit harder to find. But you can usually find a good cotton yarn pretty much at any craft store. I like to think of cotton as wool's counterpart, because wool will keep you really warm and cotton will keep you cool. Cotton is breathable, but the downside is sometimes that it stretches a little bit. And you want to make sure that if you're making something like socks, you don't want them to stretch too much so they get too big and fall off of you. But if you're just making another garment that you are okay with a little bit of stretch, cotton is your go-to. It's breathable, it's light, it's wearable, and it's adjustable throughout the seasons. If some people find cotton a little bit too stiff to work with, there's also things like bamboo yarn, which is silky smooth. And bamboo yarn also has the same breathability. It is a little bit harder to find and usually a little more expensive than cotton yarn. The third type of yarn is the synthetics, and those are really easy to find. You can get them just about anywhere, even Walmart. Synthetic yarn is usually either rayon or acrylic, but acrylic is by far the most popular yarn. It comes in a variety of thicknesses, feels, and it's usually the cheapest. Synthetic yarns like acrylics can be dyed bright neon colors. The downside is that they usually will melt under the heat, so you can't make anything heat safe with them. Also, they tend to have a cheaper feel to them, but there are some blends and some that just feel a little softer. One good thing about them is that they are really machine washable, and you can kind of put a lot of wear into it before it gives out, which it usually doesn't. One con about synthetic yarns like this is that they never decompose, which means they're basically plastic. And if you care about sustainability, that might be something you want to consider about that and weigh out your options. Finally, the most elusive type of yarn is the blends. And blends can be made out of any single fiber that I just talked about or others. A blend yarn sometimes has synthetic and synthetic, natural and natural, or it even has a blend of synthetic and natural combined. These are going to be the specialty yarns you see at stores, like, for instance, this one right here. This one is called Fisherman's Wool, and you would think it would be just wool, but it isn't. It actually is 78% wool, 13% acrylic, and 9% rayon, which gives it a little bit softer feel to traditional wool and makes it a little bit more washable. Now that you know the different sizes and fiber types of yarn, I hope that you can make better informed decisions about which ones are right for you and your future projects. Stay tuned for next week when I describe the differences between a cone, a skein, a ball, and a cake. Thank you so much for watching. I truly appreciate it, and please subscribe for more, send to your friends, and definitely like. And hit that little bell so you know when the next episode's coming out. Thank you again so much, and until next time, happy making! Yeah!